This week, to be closer to China. First strikes in a China-U.S. trade clash. The U.S. readies tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese imports. China fires back with tariffs on $50 billion of U.S. imports. China appeals to the WTO. Trump threatens another $100 billion. Markets worldwide gyrate with uncertainty. What's the background? What's the prediction?
You shall not be every time soft, and you should take appropriate and revenge, and in appropriate degree and in appropriate time to teach the guy.
With U.S. and China moves and countermoves, what's really going on?
So we need strategic dialogue to have strategic understanding of each other. Good tensions, capabilities.
Looking deeper, is there a growing global pushback against China's rise? What should China do?
So Donald Trump probably is the symptom, but the roots of the problem is actually reflected in the American economy and the society.
This week, be closer to China.
In the opening shots in a looming trade war, the United States said it is moving to counter what it calls China's economic aggression. China's Ministry of Commerce warns China does not want to fight a trade war, but it is absolutely not afraid of a trade war. While most American economists and business executives reject sweeping tariffs targeting China, disagreeing vehemently with President Trump, they do broadly condemn what they call the negative economic impact of China's industrial policies and unfair trade practices. Frankly, on getting tough with China, I've not seen such consensus on both ends of the divisive American political spectrum. A storm seems brewing. The seas of China-U.S. relations do not look calm. There's a larger context, an apparent growing pushback against China's rising international engagement. In the U.S., not only imbalances of trade, but technology transfer of one kind or another, Confucius institutes at universities, Chinese media. In Germany and the EU, buying technology, splitting Europe. In Australia and New Zealand, political influence. The budding quadrilateral security dialogue among U.S., China, India, and Australia is assumed to counter China's increasing economic and military power. What is really going on, and what can China do about it? We find out to be closer to China.
On April 3rd, the Trump administration released a 58-page list of about 1,300 Chinese imports worth roughly $50 billion U.S. that will be subject to new tariffs of 25%. The focus was on high-tech products and included metals and machinery. On April 4th, China's Ministry of Finance declared that it would impose 25% tariffs on 106 U.S. products in 14 areas, including soybeans, automobiles, and chemicals, worth an equivalent $50 billion U.S. On April 5th, President Trump doubled down by threatening to impose tariffs on an additional $100 billion U.S. of Chinese imports. On April 6th, China's Ministry of Commerce responded by reiterating that China will fight to the end to defend its own legitimate interests and is willing to pay any price if the United States sticks to unilateralism and trade protectionism. Since the United States and China proposed tariffs against each other, markets and countries globally have been watching the world's two largest economies. Investors, economists, and policymakers worry that a China-U.S. trade war could affect global trade, and almost all concur that in a trade war, all sides lose. Considering our interconnected global economy, a China-U.S. trade war could cut 1 to 3% from global GDP. 2018 marks the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up, and under the leadership of the CPC, with Xi Jinping as its core, China states it is committed to comprehensively deepening reform and to open its markets further to foreign investors.
I want to begin with what is really a tough question. And the question is this to my friends. While it's certainly true that the latest and trigger for the tensions between China and the U.S. comes, and the perception is that the U.S. started it. It's entirely the U.S.'s fault. That China is innocent. China wasn't doing anything, but now has these tariffs slapped on them. And so this is a U.S. problem. The U.S. caused it. They've got to solve it. Do you agree with that, Professor Wang?
I think that it's probably take two hands to clap. But I do think there's a deep-rooted problem there. First of all, I think there's a statistic calculation problem, because we traditionally rely heavily on the goods movement, and then for the servers, for the e-commerce, a lot of statistics was not taken into consideration. For example, like Apple just wired back $350 billion US dollars, and China is the largest market for them. So there could be there.
Are you saying the trade balance is a false issue?
I think there's at least there's probably 100 billion can be locked there if we really do an accurate statistical analysis.
You still have 250. If I agree to you 100%,
yes,
which I'm sure I wouldn't, but assume 100%, you still have 250 billion left over.
That's right. And so for that left over, I think that we need both sides to do joint efforts. For example, I think probably U.S. can relax on some of the technology export, and also giving into consideration of China, e-commerce is booming. Like there's 400 million middle-class buyers online, and one day they can create billions of dollars of shopping spree, and then that can be diverted to the United States if the two customers of China and U.S. can really get sorted out. So I think there's a lot of potential for doing that.
I cannot agree with this kind of opinion. But of course, I will not forgive President Trump. And he's a very special U.S. president. And some American trade, rivalry and trade friction, and has existed with us for decades. But never previously there was a U.S. president so volatile, so irresponsible, so Machiavellian, so cynical. And in fact, this is not only China's conclusion. This is world conclusion. And before he launched such kind of provocative, trade and tough punitive measures, he already threatened and even punished and many other countries in the world. And also, and sometimes, U.S. government, and sometimes the Chinese side, and take a little too much in the past, regarding position, and a little too much egoism. And so in the past, although there is sometimes a serious trade dialogue, but still both sides both did too little. And the United States government criticized a lot, do so little. And Chinese side and say mighty words, and a lot, but also do little. But still, I think that my government in the past should do much more to increase U.S. import to China, to broaden much vigorously China market access, and to foreign capital.
The argument, of course, is that people have been talking for decades, at least 2 decades, and American presidents have been very sophisticated, and the problem has only gotten worse. But on the issues with China, what is fascinating to me is that on this issue, we see almost unanimity among both parties in terms of recognizing that Trump has put his finger on a problem. Even though they may disagree with the tariffs themselves, they recognize there's a deeper problem. China has never given it proper attention. Now they're paying attention. Is that a legitimate analysis, Professor Shi?
And of course, and the United States Democrats hate Trump. Some people in the mainstream Republicans hate Trump. But Trump is a new problem. They hate Trump. But in their eyes, and with necessary distortion, and China truly practices old problem. And I don't think that the decisive issue is, whether this kind of complaints or angry is right. The political reality is that if you want to protect the very important Sino-American relationship. If you want to protect the China's financial and economic and other interests in this China-U.S. trade relationship, and you should to fund, the complaints and to deal with it without make too much sacrifice to damage the China interest.
Professor Wang, does this surprise you that the unanimity of American forces that recognize that what Trump is doing, even though they don't like him, but what he's doing for China really is strategically well positioned?
Well, it's not surprised me. Actually, you see, I think that as globalization is moving on for hundreds of years, in particular accelerated during the recent 50, 60 years, particularly China in the last 40 years has drastically changed its landscape economically, globally. So there is a sentiment that is not, negative sentiment in the U.S., and also there's a feeling of every year there's 200 billion or 300 billion deficit floating around from Pacific this side to the other side. I mean, accumulatively, that's probably not sustainable. So Donald Trump probably is the symptom, but the roots of the problem is actually reflected in the American economy and the society, and also, as you said, is a bipartisan view on that.
What do you think are specific concessions that each side can make?
Okay. Yeah, I think the two leaders, now have a hotline communications. As both leaders should talk to, and the top 8 of the leaders, should have a very frank conversation with each other about the problems of relationship. That's one. Number 2, media here play a very important role. They are too focused on the so-called political transformation, changes of political institutions. They don't want, or they are so ignorant in looking at the other facts, other sides of the changes taking place in China, such as in terms of environmental protections, in the poverty fightings, and many others.
The recently concluded 2 sessions sent a signal that China would increasingly contribute to world development along with its own development. But even aside from the possible trade war, China seems beset by mounting challenges or pushbacks in various countries against its proactive international activities. For instance, the more than 100 Confucius Institutes that have been established at American universities since 2005 have been criticized as carrying the party's political message and curtailing free speech, a sacred American principle. A similar concern of rising Chinese power is said to bring together Japan, India, Australia, and the U.S. to consider forming a quadrilateral security dialogue, which is assumed to be in response to China's growing economic and military power.
As we're following this, Professor Shi, is a pushback against China's international expansion a legitimate observation of what's happening?
Pushback is normal. And if you still and effective that there's no such sort of pushback, and it will be very, very strange. And this is international politics. And you should not expect that the people fully understand you, and not only that, even fully sympathize with you. But at the same time, and the practice matters. When we deal with the trade problem, we are a little too romantic. And we talk more about what we should do. But if you look at the reality, and I think that China is in a dilemma. If we make a lot of concessions, and there's a possibility, and Mr. Trump will become even wilder. He's least thankful people in the world.
Professor Wang, if you look at studying international relations, particularly political economy, how much of an analysis of the trade problems are related to some of these other non-trade factors, political problems, emotional feelings about China's rise?
There are a lot of reactions and public opinions, or even anger. as some the responses to the negative side consequences of the economic globalizations and the internationalizations of the U.S. economy in the last 20 years. According to the American Institute, like a Pearson Institute study, U.S. is the largest beneficiary of the globalizations. So in the distributions of the benefits of free trade, the government should play a role to help the workers, the laborers, affected negatively by trade. China at this moment has become the scapegoating goals, as we should understand the role of the domestic politics about China trade.
And is that universal? Do you see that in Europe? You see that? Is this a conspiracy by Western countries to all think the same and try to contain China? Or is it happening organically because things that China are doing? Professor Wang?
Well, I think that there's several reasons to that. I think probably, China was developing really fast. That took a lot of people by surprise. I mean, in the Western U.S. and Europe, and that's true. Second, I think also that China was a different system. That is so-called Chinese characteristics, socialism system, that also different from those Western countries. And thirdly, I think that there is a reason that people-to-people exchange. There's not enough understanding of Western China. For example, I'll give you an example. There is about 50, according to our CCG study, there's about 50 million people of China went abroad, not including Hong Kong and Macau, but went abroad, 50 million. But there's only 20 million foreigners come to China. There's a big gap. So also understanding of China, I think the knowledge of China. So there's a lot of that. And so a foreign student also. There's 400,000 students currently studying in the USA from China. There's only 20,000 US students studying in China. That's about 20 times difference. So you see, all those things actually created also, there's a misconception. But I think more so is that China, I think there's a problem on China too, is that how to better explain and how to better really talk in the terms of Western can understand. So there's a lot of work to do to correct this misunderstanding and confusion between the two parties.
Professor Xu, can you use game theory to analyze the relative strategic position right now at this moment?
I think that China have, at this moment and in the black future, China have a huge structural, benefits or strengths. And China have, centralized power, and the people support the government, at least in those the government. And we can have something just like, national actions under commanding. United States and other advanced countries, and even most of or all the developing countries have disadvantages compared with China. But strategically speaking, Trump now, I personally believe that he have a strategic advantage because he is much more strongly inclined to take a risk and to even commit some serious and policy mistakes. He don't care about it. He already so notorious.
I want to reiterate that the essence
China has reiterated that although it doesn't want to start a trade war with the U.S., it will defend the country's and its people's interests. Markets globally drop precipitously. While moves and countermoves escalate and few experts dare to make predictions beyond platitudes, there is a general feeling that neither China nor the U.S. will allow current tensions to spiral out of control.
So what would all of you recommend under those circumstances? What is your recommendation to China? Professor Wang.
My recommendation to the Chinese policymakers, I think, would be several points. First, I think we could probably reduce some of the tariff, as Premier Li has already said. For example, I think Chinese consumer doesn't want to pay 25% import tax on the automobiles, and also the luxury goods as well, cosmetics and things like that. That could be easily probably reduced. And second, I think that we should really establish an e-commerce protocol between China and the U.S. so that the Chinese consumers, unlike buyers, can really directly tap into this U.S. huge market for a variety of products, even milk powders or agricultural food and you name it. Thirdly, I think that China should attract more tourism and the students from U.S. to China. Because, right now there's very imbalanced on that issue. So that could increase the understanding. Fourthly, I think that China and U.S. actually should really be a major player on those international institutions. I don't agree that Donald Trump is going to backing off of those. The American elite and American policymakers still wants to maintain this international global economic order. So China can really supplement that. For example, we can work on WTO. We can increase the cooperation on TPP. We can actually, maybe Asia-Pacific, we can work on the FTAP on that. And finally, I think that's very important is that both sides should enhance the people-to-people exchange, because also top leaders should really work together. And also we need to go to a new paradigm of international trade.
We should take more actions to substantially broaden China's market access and increase China's imports from United States as well as EU. And this itself not only can defend beneficial foreign relationship for China, but also is greatly required for China's so-called high-quality type of advancement and development. But on the other hand, and this is a battle, and it shall not be every time solved. And you should take appropriate and revenge and in appropriate degree and in appropriate time to teach the guy, and even, and I think that at least you should take some hard elements and field it into your strategy and make it a combined one.
The number one, keep the calm down approach. Don't react to the stimulations from the American side. Secondly, deal with the people like the President Trump and his team. I think they are living in the era of the 19th century about trade. Right, so we have to deal with the U.S. team in a position of power to let the American the counterparts to understand what kind of cards or bargaining chips in the hands of China.
Professor Sure.
I start debate, and you see that the Professor Wang is much more liberal than me, and I am more realistic than me. But I would like to remind my friend, and today in this world, the game board is much less liberal than in the past. And also my colleague in Beijing University. And your suggestion government should have another side. You should remind the government what your wonderful suggestion have, what kind of negative aspects, what is risks, what is possible costs. And I emphasize, and previously, our position now is in a difficult situation. We have a dilemma. And now this threatening trade war, just like a drama, the author is God. No one, even President Trump and President Xi Jinping, no hold the process of the drama because it is still in the future. Interaction will decide the process.
I'm going to ask you each 2 questions. I want very short answers. What is your prediction for the short-term relationships on what seems to be a potential for a budding trade war? Professor Wang.
Well, I think I'm still optimistic. I think this new move by Trump that got the attention of the both countries, and I think now they are in a deep, serious discussions. I think business also get affected. The people in general also get affected. So in the end, it will be solved peacefully. I think.
Okay, short term is positive, Professor Sure.
I think that the threatening trade war would be much less severe than, and these days, and most media predicted. But 6 months later, and 1 year later, Mr. Trump will land boxing battleground bell again and again.
Professor Wang.
For short term, I have the mixed feelings. I think politicians in the U.S. have the political demand of being tough on China. I think Chinese side, they understand what the U.S., the government, they want, and we hope they can put all the wish list on the table. Both sides can make deal. That will benefit all the sides.
Okay, now long term, what's your judgment?
Well, I think China has already gone through a big paradigm shift. China has embraced globalization and free trade than ever before. And U.S. is founded on the free trade and globalization. So I think in the end, probably they will emerge together and converge. And so as the two biggest trading partners, they are already, it's in the same value chain, global value chain, and they now cannot separate from each other.
Okay, that's the rational approach. Professor Xu, can you give us a realistic approach?
I don't believe this kind of prospects. And I only can consult the history. You look at the China-U.S. action-reaction in the past 2 decades. You found the strategic rivalry become more profound, more comprehensive, and more prominent. And at first, people said that the trading is a win-win game. But you began to find this win-win game began to produce zero-sum game, partly economic nature, partly strategic nature. So I think that Sino-American relationship, in the extent of my ability to predict, will go this kind of trajectory.
I see the sine wave, but were you trending down, or you were just getting tired as you went to the bottom?
Have a lot of visitors, but in the practical future, still will go downturn.
But there's a geopolitical danger, though. There's a Taiwan issue, there's a North Korea issue, so that is going to jeopardize the economic cooperation. That is a real risk.
Long term?
I'm cautiously optimistic. Economically, U.S. and China are the partners of nature. Based on the concept of comparative advantage, both sides will continue to benefit from each other's growth. The one American political scientist, Professor Joseph Nye, back to the 1990s, he made the statement, if you treat China as enemy, China will be the enemy. I think the same thing in China and to Chinese people. If you treat America as an enemy, America will be the enemy. So we need strategic dialogue to have strategic understanding of each other. So I'll have the confidence with the strong leadership of the President Xi. China will meet these goals set by ourselves.
I'm not so confident. And in this sense, the future is unpredictable. If our international environment becomes too conflict or the rivalry charged, and one possibility is that, and whether as a challenge or as a pleasure, as an encouragement, and Chinese leaders will insist on what China really required to more opening up and to deepening and reform and make China become really have escalated national capability and social health. But on the other hand, and history told us, and if we environment is too rivalry and conflict charged, and this will make a domestic society, political leadership may be a little more conservative to defend the status quo interests. And so, at this moment, and in the beginning of the double tension on strategic as well as economic front between China and the United States, I cannot predict, necessarily this way or that way. Challenge will always in the future.
Here's my pledge to the three of you that in 2049, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, we'll all come back here to judge the accuracy of your prediction for the previous 31 years. That's my pledge to you.
I will more right because I raised two possibilities.
We'll be here.
Okay, see you then. 2049.